already possible her from eating truma now because she's eventually going to have that beer or not. That was the shaila that the Mishnah was discussing, and the Mishnah, in fact, has a machlokes. Reb Meir holds Mishnah Meres Labia Psula. Since she's going to do a bia after the Nisun, and right now she's a Gerusha, she's not allowed to be married to her husband. She's already usher to eat truma now. If he dies before, then she'll be mutter again. But she'll be usher now already. And Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon said, no, right now, she didn't have the Nisun yet. Right now, she didn't have bia yet. So even though she has a kedushin to a kohen, which is an iser, nevertheless, she's not disqualified from eating truma that she's eating from her father's house. Of course, he can't be Michael for truma. It's an usher dekazivog, but will he passel her from eating truma that she's already eat anyway from her father's household? Thank you very much. Right? Thank you very much, Martin. Oh, so now the Gemara had a very interesting shadow. What about if you flip it around? What if the problem isn't because she's usher to him? What if the problem is if he's usher to her? What if it's a kohen of psuadaka? A psuadaka is not allowed to marry loyove bekal. He's not allowed to marry anyone who's considered kahal Yisrael, the gemeinde of Klal Yisrael. So the question is, would he also cause that she shouldn't be able to eat truma? So the Gemara said, this was the question that Rabbi Yochanan asked of Rabbi Oishia, and Rabbi Oishia didn't answer. And there was a tiny that why didn't he answer Rabbi Yochanan? Isn't Rabbi Yochanan Agav Rabbah? But the question the Gemara was discussing was Psudak Kohen Shenosa Bas Gerim. So if the Psudak was married to a regular Bas Yisrael, that was one shiloh that was asked. And the Gemara says it's all totally in if he could be Michael or B'makam Acher. So Abai and Rava said that a Psuadaka could be Michael B'makam Acher. He could be Michael who's a Vadim, or a Psuadaka that was already married before he became a Psuadaka is also Michael. So therefore, a Psuadaka would be Michael. But the question the Gemara wanted to know is a Kohen who married Bas Gerim, could he be Michael her Betruma? A Bas Gerim is for sure not a Bas Kohen, because there's no such thing as a ger who becomes a Kohen. There's no, you can't get like an updated gears. I want to be Megayer to be a Kohen. It doesn't work that way. So because of that, if a Kohen of Psuadaka marries a Bas Gerim, could he be Michael or Betruma? So the Gemara said that there's actually a lot of moving parts to this shiloh. The first moving part is a Bas Gerim called Kahal? If you hold a Bas Gerim is called Kahal, then this marriage is usher. If this marriage is usher, he for surely cannot be Michael or Betruma. He's not allowed to be married to her. But if Kahal Gerim is lo yikri Kahal, then for sure he is allowed to marry. For sure she's allowed to marry him, and then he could be Michael. So because of that, the Gemara didn't understand why is it a shaila. So then the Gemara introduced another moving part. When a kohen becomes a psuadaka, does he lose his status of kahuna legabe restricting who he's allowed to marry? So a kohen of psuadaka, is he allowed to marry a grusha or not? So that's another shaila that got mixed into the blend. The Gemara actually said, according to Rabbi Yosy, who holds kahal gerim loy ikri kal, so therefore, the kohen is allowed. The kohen is up to a daka is allowed to marry this ger. He could still hold that the kohen cannot marry a grusha v'chalutza. So it's possible that she's not considered kahal, and therefore she could marry up to a daka. Yet a kohen still cannot marry.
What's the svara? What's the svara that she shouldn't be considered the kahal? I mean, they have the same chiyuv. Yeah, all the mitzvahs.
I'm not sure, and that's a different sugya. So I don't know the answer to that. But there is a machlokes if kal gerim ikra kahal or not, and therefore if a psuadaka could marry gerim. But I don't know the svara behind the machlokes. Because, like you said, they're misgayer. Why aren't they part of Klal Yisrael?
They're misgayer and they're mechayev in all the mitzvahs, and they're punished for all the lavim. And
that's right. That's right. So the Gemara ends up saying that there's a third shita of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. The third shita of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says that kahal gerim is not ikri kahal, and the kahal gerim wouldn't be able to marry kohanim. However, if you have a geyeris in this case, or she's not a geyeris, if she's the daughter of two parents, and one of the two parents are Jewish, that could marry kahuna. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that a woman whose both parents are gerim may not marry a kohen, but a woman who only has one parent that's a ger or a geyeris, and the other parent is Yisrael, she is allowed to marry kahuna. So the Gemara Shaila is, if she can marry kahuna, the fact that she can marry kahuna, what does that mean? Does that also mean she's kahal? I mean, she's even allowed to marry kahuna. So obviously she's kahal. But if that's the case, then the P'tzudaka cannot marry her because lo yava P'tzudaka b'kal Hashem. Or do you say no? She's muter kahuna, but she's still not considered kahal gerim. So therefore, she's allowed to marry this kohen, and the kohen's allowed to marry her, which is a very interesting paradox. She's muter kahuna, but she's not called kahal. A P'tzudaka could marry her. That was the shaila, and in fact, the Gemara brings a raya from a pasuk from a brisa that in fact that is the case. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, she is muter kahuna, but she's still not called kahal Yisrael. So therefore, she's allowed to marry this P'tzudaka because she's not part of kahal Yisrael, and she's allowed to marry kohen because she's considered Jewish enough to marry a kohen. She's not considered a zayna. And that was the end of yesterday's Gemara. So we had some interesting questions. We don't forget all the details, but we just have to know the basics. The basic trial is kahal gerim ikri kahal. It's a difficult thing to understand, like David said. And then the other shaila is, if a kohen becomes a p'tzudaka, does he lose the restrictions of who he's allowed to marry? In other words, very simply stated, can a kohen of p'tzudaka marry a grusha? Yes or no? There's a machlokes about that. So those are the two interesting questions.
What's the difference? What's the difference between a bas gerim and a geyeris?
A bas gerim means
halachically.
Halachically, whether or not you can marry a kohen.
Well, so a geyeris cannot marry a kohen?
No,
but a bas gerim could marry a kohen?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. She was born Jewish. That a bas gerim can marry a kohen doesn't bother you. You don't understand why a ger can't marry a kohen. She's Jewish, right? She's a Kabbalah mitzvah. She's everything.
Right.
But I think it's because we assume she was a zoyna. Okay. So let's see the head of the Gemara weiter. The next sugya we're getting into is a Welt sugya. It's called Chuppa l'psulos, and it's a very big sugya in Maseches Kedushin, but it comes up here as well. Itmar. So we're at the last line of Daf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Itmar Rav Omar. Rav says, Yesh Chuppa l'psulos. What that means, as you could see from Tosfos, is not so simple. So we'll look at the three options of how to learn what this machlokes is about. Rashi says right on top, what is yesh chuppa l'psulos? Kohen gadol shehichnis almana bas kohen l'chuppa. So a kohen gadol is not allowed to marry an almana, but this kohen gadol violated that rule, and he took an almana bas kohen to the chuppa. So they went to chuppa. We don't even know what chuppa means yet. We're going to get to what chuppa means in a minute. But whatever chuppa is, he did that. But he never did bia. Umeikara nami loikitcha. There was no kedushin. Afilu hachi paslami truma devinasha. She'll still become usher to eat truma that she was allowed to eat from her father's household. He puzzled her. The chuppah he kenisas beila dami. So this is a loaded Rashi. We had a machlok between Reb Meir and Reb Eliezer ben Shimon about a kohen who married an almana, but it was only a kedushin. And there's a machlok is if kedushin or mishtameres will be a psula. Right now she cannot do a bia, but since a woman who's done erison is going to eventually do a bia, will that pass over from truma? Here there was no kedushin at all. There was just a chuppah. A chuppah might be able to do more damage than a kedushin, because a chuppah is mamish knisa, is knisas be'iladam. So that is the Gemara Shai. The big machloikis here is this chuppah, is this after the kedushin or is it before the kedushin? That's a whole big shaila. I'm happy you brought it up. So let's do step by step. Let's see what a chuppah is. There's a multiple way machloikis. I think there's 5 shitas. I'm hoping I'll be able to remember all 5 shitas. What chuppah is, and I'm going to go in order of how I remember it. The Rambam shita in what chuppah is being miyached a woman to you, labia. That's what chuppah is. Maybe that's what the yichud room does. It's being miyached a woman to you, labia. That's what the Rambam means. In other words, you set her aside that she's going to be a woman who I'm going to make a biyah. You don't have to actually make the biyah, but you have to designate that this is the woman that I'm going to make a biyah. Okay. There's another shot that we'll be more familiar with, is that you take her into your home. That's something we're familiar with. That's why the chassan goes down the chuppah first. And he's cleaning the chuppah. And when the kala comes down the chuppah, he takes a step forward, comes out of the chuppah, and sort of welcomes her into the virtual home, the home of the chuppah. Yeah, he's taking her into her home. What? But everybody, our meaning is for the chassan to go first. I think so. I remember. I think I walked forward. Yeah. Our meaning is to do whatever the rabbi tells you to do. Okay, that was the second version. The other version is the badekin. There's a sheet in the Rishonim that the badekin is the chuppah. So that's why is the chuppah done first or not? If it's the badekin, is that what you meant? If it's the badekin, it's for sure first. The other shita is you stand there up in a public place to announce this is the chassan, this is the kala. So the kedushin is done. Doesn't have to be the other way, but we're putting the chassan and kala on a platform and a pedestal. And then everybody at the wedding knows, oh, that's the chassan and kala. So it's just to demonstrate to everybody that's the chassan and kala. Okay. And the other one is you put a shmata over them. You wrap them in the same covering. So there are those who learn that that's the chuppah, the four posts and the shmat on top. But I think the Yekis actually wrap the chassan and kala under one talus together. I think that's their minute. That's where it comes from, because they're under one beged together. So those are the different shitas of what a chuppah actually is. But there's a machloikis about what a chuppah can actually accomplish. So Rashi says that this was a chuppah without erison. So Tosha says, a chuppah without erison, why does that have any impact at all? It must be that Rashi holds, like a shita of Rav Huna in Meseches Kedushin, that the chuppah is kind of erison. So the chuppah not only does what it has to do as far as the chuppah is concerned, but the chuppah also creates a kinyan for Kedushin. Because otherwise, why should this chuppah have any validity or power at all? That's how Tosfos understands Rashi, and he has a whole bunch of kashas on Rashi because of it. And Tosfos actually learns that this Gemara is speaking where there was Kedushin and there was Chuppa after the Kedushin. That's what the shayla over here is in this Gemara. But there are many Rishonim who argue on Tosfos, and they'll know Rashi is talking about not according to Punda. And Chuppa is not koinat Kedushin. But the question is, can Chuppa do damage? Will it cause the psula to become osir? Even though there is no Kedushin here at all. So those are the different versions. So there's basically 3 versions. There's 2 pshatim of Rashi. The way Tosfos understands Rashi, that it's going according to Rav Huna, that a chuppah actually makes a kedushin as well. So that's why this chuppah is more than a regular kedushin, because it has chuppah in it as well. Or the other pshat in Rashi is no, the chuppah does not do a kinyan, but the chuppah itself might be able to do damage. And the third sheet is Tosfos, where we're talking about chuppah after kedushin had already been done. So yesh chuppah l'psulas. Someone did, according to Rashi, someone did a chuppah, the kohen did a chuppah with this woman who's also with him, even though Kedushin alone might not do it, because we had a machlokes in our Mishnah, maybe Chuppa is worse. Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Ein Chuppa l'psulas. She's a pasala, there's no Chuppa. Now, one of the big problems with this sugya is the Rambam paskins, like Rav, that yesh Chuppa l'psulas. The problem is, the Rambam also paskins that a Chuppas Nida doesn't work. So the Maggid Mishnah asks on the Rambam, how could you say a Chuppas Nida doesn't work? The Kedushin is called, but it's not called Nesuin. How could you say a Chuppas Nida doesn't work? He holds Yesh Chuppa l'psulas. Anita technically is possible to him now. So why would the Rambam hold that a Chuppas Nida doesn't work? So the Maggid Mishnah says as far, there's a lot of Torah on this, but the most known teret is the teret of the Maggid Mishnah, that when someone does a Chuppas Nida, he has no intention of doing a biyah. You're not allowed to do a biyah to a nida. So since while you're doing the chuppah, there's no intent for a bia now, right? Therefore, it's not a good chuppah. But when someone is doing a chuppah on almana, when a kohen gadol is doing a chuppah on almana, he's doing it because he plans to live with her. He's doing a violation, right? He knows he's doing something else. So this is a chuppah where he actually intends to do a bia afterwards. That's why it's worse. So it's totally in the intent of the person. If you're not intending to do a bia based on this chuppah, then it's not a kosher chuppah. But if you're planning to, even though it's usher, then it will be. Right. So this chuppah is not prepared. Yeah. So that according to the Rambam would not be good. It could only be a chuppah that I'm planning to do imminently a bia based on that. Okay. So let's see the Gemara. Amar Shmuel. So Shmuel said, "Umaydali Abba." Rav agrees to me. And Rashi says, why did Shmuel refer to Rav as Abba? Because Rav was much older than him. Torah says no, because Rav's first name was Abba. So Umaydali Abba, V'tinoikis Chusa Mibas Shalosh Shalom V'Yavachot. What if this almana that we're talking about, that the Kohen Gadol made kedushin, is less than 3 years old, who's not royal labia? Hoyel v'ein labia. Since such a woman cannot have bia, it's not called a bia by her. And Rashi says the definition of ein labia is, on the first skinny line in Rashi, is ein biasa poislasa mitruma savia. Even if she was nevelis to someone that was usher to her, she would still be able to eat truma because it's not called a bia. So if a bia does have no impact on this girl, chuppah, which only is something that's close to a bia, surely would not usher this girl. Since even if she was nevelis to someone who's usher to her, she would still be able to eat truma, so the chuppah surely will not damage that opportunity for her. We also learned Brisa that supports this. The Brisa says, a girl who's 3 years old and 1 day, miskadeshes b'bia, you could be mikadesher with bia, and b'bo'aleh yovem kana. It's since the bia is considered a bia, so a yovem that made bia on her would be kind of her. That's how yivim is kind of. And if she was an eshes ish, the chayavin alei misham eshes ish, someone who was bought upon her would be mechuyev because they were boiled eshes ish. And umatama is boila letame mishkav tachton kelgi. If she was a nida, the loch is a nida that sits on something, like even if you have like a case of the princess and the pea, if the nida sits on 20 mattresses, so she's only touching the first mattress, even the bottom mattress is so tame, it could be matama person, meaning the bottom mattress becomes an avatuma that if someone touches it, they'll become tame. However, if a nida touches something, doesn't sit on it, then that thing only becomes a rishon latuma. A rishon latuma cannot be matama person. So what it means is matamas boil latama mishkav tachton ke'elyoy is if this katana, who's 3 years and 1 day, is a nida, and someone is bought upon her, then he becomes tummy, but he's not as tummy as her, where if he's on a set of mattresses, those mattresses become an avatama. Rather, it's mishkav tachta, and his tachta, the mattress that he sits on, is ke'elyoin, is like a mattress that the nida wouldn't sit on but would only touch, which means it only becomes a rishon. Nisis lekoin, if this girl who's 3 years and 1 day marries a kohen, oichelas betruma, she would be considered married to him, and therefore she would eat truma on his account. And bo'aleh echad michalap psulin, if anyone who's possible is ba'aner pasla, it will passel her to kahuna. Zok the Gemara, bashal yishalim b'yomechad hu the mifsala b'biyah, therefore mifsala b'chuppah. A bashal yishalim b'yomechad, since biyah would passel her, in other words, she was developed to a goy, that would passel her to kahuna. Therefore, the chuppah would passel her as well. But a girl who's less than 3 years old, even if she was developed to a pasala, she would not become pasal because her bia is not a bia. Therefore, nami shmamina. So basically, the chuppah is not quite bia, but it's closer to a bia than a mere kedushin. So by kedushin, there's a machlokes if it's called a lady who's mishmeres l'bia psula, right? But by chuppah, it's even worse because a chuppah is even closer. So the shaila in the Mishnah between Reb Meir and Reb Elazar B'Shimon was mishmeres l'bia psula, if that's going to answer her. Chuppa is more, and there's a machlokes Rav and Shmuel. According to Rav, everybody would agree that it's going to be also because it's closer to a bia, according to Shmuel, not. Zok to Gemara. Amar Rami Bar Chama. Yesh chuppa l'psulos. This shaylav yesh chuppa l'psulos. Unlike what Rav and Shmuel say that everybody would agree to them, rather I understand that Zok Rami Bar Chama is bonu l'machloikos Rav Meir Rav Elazar b'Shimon. Rami Bar Chama wants to tell you that the machlokes between Rav Elazar, Rav Shimon, and Rav Meir of a mishtamer to be a psula. If that asher, that would apply to a chuppah l'psulos as well. L'Rav Meir the Omar. So now we're on Nun Ches Amar Aleph. L'Rav Meir the Omar kedushin pasli. According to Rav Meir, who holds even kedushin pasels, because the case of our Mishnah, it was only a kedushin. Therefore, chuppah nami pasla. The chuppah will pasel her as well. The Rav Elazar, Rav Shimon, the army kedushin loy pasli. According to Rav Elazar, Rav Shimon holds merely being mekadosh a woman who's also to you, that will not pasel her. Chuppah nami loy pasla. Fact Gemara, why would you say that the machlokes of yesh chuppa l'psulos would have anything to do with the machlokes of Rav Meir and Rav Elazar and Rav Shimon? And we might. Maybe why did Rav Meir hold that by a woman who's mekudeshes to a kohen and she's also to marry him, and that's called mishameres l'bi psula? Why did Rav Meir ask her there ela b'kedushin the kanila? Because he learns that kedushin makes a kinyan. Maybe Rav Meir disagrees with this whole thing, and the holds Chuppa doesn't make a kinyan. And if Chuppa doesn't make a kinyan, loy, it's just a ceremony, but it doesn't make any type of kinyan. And in order to create an isser, there has to be that type of kinyan. So maybe Rav Meir would hold that mishtameres will be a psula. I'm sorry, maybe Rav Meir would hold that Chuppa psula, a Chuppa psula, would not ask her inami, or on the flip side, Atkan loy kami Rav Elazar Rav Shimon Hasam. Why did Rav Elazar and Rav Shimon say that a kedushin only is not going to answer her? Because ala kedushin like kreva lebia. Kedushin is not even bringing her closer to bia. It's the kinyan part. Aval chuppah the kreva lebia. Chuppah is what's basically ushering her into the bia. Maybe they hold that would be worse. Hachanami the pastor. So therefore, the machlokes between Rav Meir and Rav Elazar and Rav Shimon has no impact on if you hold yesh chuppa l'psulos. If you want to say that the shaila of yesh chuppa l'psulos is totally in a machlokes tanoim, maybe we could argue that it's totally in a different machlokes tanoim that we're going to quote. The Tanya, nisu. What if they did nisuin? Zu v'zu ksheris psulos. So let's look at Rashi of exactly what this case is. Nisu l'koyin. Two women did nisuin with a koyin. Zu v'zu. Umay zubazu, which two women are we referring to? Ksheris upsulos. So you have kosher women that became nusua to a kohen, or pasala woman that became nusua to a kohen. That's option A. Now nisu means bia. Nisuin means that they did a bia. So that's if the second option, option B is they only went into the chuppah, they didn't have bia. So we would understand nisu, the first case of the Mishnah, is if there was actually a bia. So whether there was actually a bia or there was only a chuppah, the halacha is oichlois mishaloi v'oichlois b'truma. They can eat from him and they can eat truma. So this seems to say quite clearly. That even though there was a chuppah, Zok Gemara nichnasu. If it says nichnasu l'chuppah v'lo nivalu, it's mashma michlal. The nisu is nisu mamish. So it's mashma that there's two cases in the Mishnah. One is when there was actually a bia, and one is when there was only nichnasu l'chuppah. But the problem is, can anybody hold that if there was actually a bia between a kohen and a woman who was possible to him, that he could be meichel or truma? It's not logical to say that. Nobody holds that. If a kohen married a grusha, nobody holds that she would eat truma. So if you read a brisa the way it sounds, that is two cases. Nisu means there was actually a bia, or nichsu l'chuppah, there was only a chuppah. Oichlus mishlei v'oichlus b'truma. How could you say that? Because whether or not you want to argue about the chuppah, but if there was actually a bia, surely she shouldn't be able to eat truma. Elalav, you're going to have to interpret this brisa. So when it says nisu, zu v'zu, ksher subsulois, it's not an independent case. But the Bride is saying, Nisu, Zuvazu, Ksheres, Psulais. What do we mean by Nisu? We don't mean an actual Bia occurred, because then for sure she wouldn't need Truma. What we mean is, the Nisuin that we're talking about is that there was a Chuppa, Psulais, but there was no Bia itself, which is precisely the Shiloh that we're talking about. The Chuppa of a Psula would that answer her Truma, and what does the Bride say? Oichos Mishaloi, Oichos Betruma. The Gatani, Oichos Mishaloi, Oichos Betruma. That would be the Tanakama. And on that, Rabbi Shmuel, Benoisha, Rabbi Yochanan, and Bereka comments, Omer, Kol should be Asa Machilasa, if her Bia would be Michael Betruma, Chupasa Machilasa. The Chain ain't be Asa Machilasa, ain't Chupasa Machilasa. So here we seem to have a Machlokes whether or not Chuppa Psulois will Pashalur for Truma. According to the Tanakama, it will not. And according to Rabbi Shmuel, Benoisha, Rabbi Yochanan, and Bereka will. You have seemingly a machlokes tanoim v'yesh chopel psulos. Zok Gemara, no, you don't have a raya from here to our shaila either. Mimai, Dilma Rabbi Shmuel b'noisho Rabbi Yochanan ben Bereka Reb Meir shvirli. Maybe Rabbi Shmuel b'noisho Rabbi Yochanan ben Bereka holds like Reb Meir. The Omar kedushin. We know in our Mishnah Reb Meir holds never mind the chuppah. Even if you make kedushin even if a kohen makes kedushin on a woman who he's not allowed to be married to, the kedushin alone will disqualify her from eating truma because she's called a mishta meres will be a psula. Zok to Gemara, that cannot be pshat in Rabbi Shmuel b'noshel Rabbi Yochanan ben Bereka because those aren't the words that he used. He used chupasa machilasa or chupasa en machilasa. So he's not talking about. How can you say what he means is that the kedushin is causing that? Like Reb Meir, those aren't the words that he used. Freit Gemara, high kol shein bi'asa machilasa en chupasa machilasa. That's not the way he would have said it that he held like Reb Meir. What he would have said is, Kol she'en biyasa machilasa, en kaspa machilasa mibayla. If he was holding like Reb Meir, that it's the kedushin that creates the problem. Zok Gemara, no, maybe he really means it's just the kedushin that's disqualifying her. So why does he use the word chuppa? Dilma, I did Omar Tanakama chuppa, Omar iyunami chuppa. The Tanakama was talking about chuppa. The Tanakama was trying to say that ein chuppa l'psulois, and the chuppa wouldn't disqualify her. So he was arguing on the case of the Tanakama. But the reasoning behind why he was arguing might be because of the kedushin that was done prior to the chuppa. Amar Rav Amar. So Rav Amar said, the following halacha was shared with us by Rav Sheshes, and he proved it to us from a Mishnah. And what he said was, Yesh chopel psulos. So Rav Sheshes found another Tana that holds Yesh chopel psulos. And now we're going to find Tanoim that would argue, because we tried twice to pin this machlokes of Yesh chopel psulos on Tanoim. We tried putting it on the Tanoim of our Mishnah, and the Gemara refuted that. We tried saying that this machlokes with Rabbi Shmuel ben Bereka, the Tanakama, was about Yesh chopel psulos, and again we refuted that. So now we're going to try finding another place where we see Tanoim who argue on it. So Rabbi Shesha says we know from the following Mishnah, but Tanatuna, it says by Saita that when they're mashpia the Saita before she drinks from the Mei Saita, she says Amen. It says Amr Ha'isha Amen Amen. The woman says Amen twice, and the two Amens are she's not just swearing that she didn't do bia based on this stira that she just did. Rather, Shaloishatisi Arusa Unasua Shemeresh Yavam Uknusa. She's saying not only did I not violate my marriage now, but even when I was only in Arusa, back before I was a Nesua, or even if I'm a woman who's married to my husband because he did Yibum on me, I wasn't Mizana even before he did Yibum. All of those are included in her Shvua that she makes when she says that she's clean. So, frankly, more high Arusa Hechidami. Exactly what is the case? She says, Shaloi Satisi Arusa. I wasn't Mizana when I was only on Arusa. What does she mean to say? Hechidami. Ilema de Kanila Kisharusa. So we're trying to probe what type of Arusa would be subject to the Bedika of the Mei Saita. If we're talking about that he made Kinoi when she was in Arusa, so he had already warned her, don't be miyachid with Pliny when she was only in Arusa, even before she was in the Suah, and then the Bach sticks in v'yistatra v'kamashkala keshi Arusa, and all of this is happening when she's in Arusa. That cannot be. because arusa bash mishtayehi, we know that an arusa does not drink from the mayim hamarim. So the case cannot be when we're being mashpir her as an arusa. It can't be that this whole thing happened, including the kino and the stira and the shtia. It definitely cannot happen when she's an arusa. She already had to be a nesua, because what Nani learned, arusa b'shemeres yavim loy shaisais loy noitlas ksuba. We actually had this. We had this brights already, which means if an arusa is chashud that she did nos, so she doesn't get to drink, and because of that she loses her ksuba. But you see, you never give an arusa to drink to Mesai. So what must be the case where she's swearing that she wasn't Mazana even when she was arusa? Elo the kanilak is she arusa v'istatra. He made kinui on her when she was an arusa. It's funny, he went ahead with the Nasuin, even though he knew that she was fooling around, but maybe her father was rich. I don't know. So Elo the kanilak is arusa. He made kinui when she was an arusa v'istatra, and she did steer when she was an arusa, and the kamashkalak is she nesua. And then when she was in the Suah, he was master, which is amazing. Why would he make the Suah on a woman who knows violated his kingdom? But in fact, he's not allowed to marry that woman. If he made the Suah knowing that this woman was already violated his kinoi, then the Mayim Hamarim wouldn't work at all because he did an Avera. But Tanya, because the Brisa teaches us that it says in the Parsha of Soita, the Nikah Ishmael. No matter what happens to his wife, because of the Mesaita, the husband is clean. And we darshan from this pasuk that when does the Mesaita work? If the husband is squeaky clean, then the Mesaita works to be boidik his wife. That the Gemara in Torah discusses. The Gemara in Torah discusses that. But at least look up at this. And he was not allowed to make nesuin on the woman. He's not allowed to allow this woman after there's the stira. So Oibazoi, he did an avla. If he did an avla here, then the mime wouldn't be boidik her for an avla that she did when she was in Arusa. So once again, what does it mean when she swears that I wasn't chayte when I was in Arusa? Ella, what must have happened? The kanila kisharusa, he did kinoi on her when she was in Arusa, alta statri and plenty, this statri, and she violated his kinoi. She violated his kinoi when she was in Arusa. But he never made a bia on her. So now he's still menukah ma'aven because he was never bald out. But he had a chuppah. That's a chuppah of psulais because it's a chuppah with a woman who he was not allowed to have bia with. And she made the shvu arusa. So vice the chayis, it works. Ushmami no yesh chuppah of psulais. So here you have a raya that yesh chuppah of psulais. Zok the Gemara, no, you don't have a raya at all. Amarabba, but tizbra. You actually bring me a raya from this case. The Hamad Haratzti, you think this brisa that you quoted is reliable and you could bring a raya from it? Absolutely not. Because when Acha Bar Chanina came from the south, also he came, and he brought with him a Mishnah that taught us something important. And it said, Mi baladei ishech. The Lashon Pasuk by Saita says, if someone was boil you, Mi baladei ishech, besides your husband. Well, that would tell us that Mishakadma Shchivas Baal Leboil. It means that the Parsha of Saita only works if the husband already had a bia with this lady. But if there was never a bia made by the husband to his wife, the whole Parsha of Saita doesn't work. If you want to say that this bride is speaking about a case of a Chuppah Psula, there was no bia, weiter you have a problem. Weiter the Mesaita wouldn't work. So what is the case? So what is the only possible case of how to understand this brisa where she's swearing on a violation that she did as an arusa? Is mishkachas law going sheba Allah arusa bebeisavia? It's speaking where he was bala bebeisavia, and Rashi says, how is he bala? To about an inch from the bottom of the Rashi's l'shem nus. He was mezana with his arusa beveis chameha, in his father-in-law's house, Ba'al Manusa, because we're speaking about a psula here, V'hadar kinala, so he was Ba'al B'veis Chameh Ba'al Manusa, V'hadar kinala, after he was Ba'al L'Shem Znus, then he made kinoi, then V'istatra, and then V'echnisa L'chuppah, and then he took her into the chuppah B'la Nivala. So there was never a bia done, V'isr, after the stira, A, and B is there was a bia here before this occurred. So you have the mabalade ishich. Umashkalo mashbia, and now as an asua with this couple of psulois, he is being mashker and he's making her swear shaloi satisa b'stira harishayna, that when she originally had the stira, but she was not over in the The how would this be applicable in the case of Shemesh Yavim? Because don't forget, the Bryce is talking about two tracks. It's talking about a normal marriage track, right? Arusa Unasua, but it's also talking about a Yibum track, Shemesh Yavim Ukanusa. So by the Arusa Nasua, you could say that she was only in Arusa, and then he was Baal of Aves Chamel, Lashem's Nus. So that didn't make her into Nasua. But how are you going to explain this in the Shemesh Yavim track? Shabal Yavim Aves Chamel, he made a bia upon her. Shaloi Lashem Yibum. Does that matter? It doesn't matter, because even if he does Shaloi Lashem Yibum, we learned that it will be a good Yibum. So it's up to Gemara. Are you going to tell me the Kavatzak of Shemesh Yavim Shabal Yavim Aves Chamel? Shemesh Yavim Karis Law. You're going to call it a Shemesh Yavim? If he was Bala Lashem's Nus Beves Chamel, we already learned that she becomes his wife. So then what is the case of Shemesh Yavim? How are you going to explain the Brisa that says she swears that she wasn't Mizana when she was a Shemesh Yavim? Shemesh Yavim Karsla Ishtema Al Yehi. This is his wife. The Amar Rav Kana Lachayil. Didn't Rav say that when someone does, even though it's an inferior bia, he wasn't supposed to be Baal, he was Baal Hashem's Nus. We learned a couple of days ago the Rav holds it Kana Lachayil even to be Meichel or Betruma. Zok Gemara, maybe it's Kishmul. The Amar Loikana El Ledvar Mamor Beparsha. Maybe we'll hold like Shmuel. We'll hold like Kana El Ledvar Mamor Beparsha, meaning Liyarsha, right? But not to be Meichel Betruma, and maybe not to be Mashker or Mesaita. Zok Gemara, it doesn't make any sense. Midu Time El Rav. We're only discussing this to try to bring a right to Rav that Yesh Chopel of Psulas. So we're talking according to Rav, and according to Rav, Amar Rav Kana Lakoil. So according to Rav, how are you going to learn Pshat in this brisa? According to Rav, what was the case of Shemesh Yavim Ukanus? Zaktumar Hachab Askinon, the Avad Kigayin, the Avad B'Maimer. What was the case when she's swearing? When she's a Saita, she's swearing that I didn't do Nus. When I was a Shemesh Yavim, what it means is he did Maimer. What does Maimer change? At the end of the day, if he's Ba'alaha, we learn that no matter what reason he was Ba'alaha, she's automatically considered his wife. Dr. Gemara, no. If you made Maimer and you follow the Shita Beishamai, Ubeishamai, the army Maimer, Koine, King, and Gomer. According to Beishamai, Maimer is Koine, King, and Gomer, which means once he does a Maimer on her, she loses her status of a Yevama. According to Beishamai, the Gemara wants to argue that once he does Maimer on his Yevama, now the Bia, the Shvacha Bia that normally works for Yibam without the proper Das, no longer works. Because the moment he makes Maimer on her, she's no longer a Yevama. Now she's like a regular Arusa. Freik the Gemara. So if that's the case, Ihaki Hainu Arusa. Once again, the Bride is trying to tell us in two cases. If she was a regular married woman, she could say I wasn't Mizana when I was an Arusa. And if she was a woman who was married through a Yibam, she could say she's swearing I wasn't Mizana when the Shemesh Yavim. If you're talking about the Shemesh Yavim that Maimer was made on her, so then that's the Arusa case. What's the Shemesh Yavim case? Freik the Gemara. Ulatemeich. That's not a kasha. Because it says Amen Shaloshatisi Arusa Unusua Shemesh Yavim Ukanusa. What's the difference in status between a Yavama that's a Knusa and a regular woman that's Nasua? They're both his wives. So Ulakamech Nasua Kanusa Lav Chadamilsi. Isn't Nasua and Kanusa the same thing? A regular married woman, yet the Brisa individually itemized each one. It itemized the Yibam track and it itemized the marriage track. Ela Nasua Dida, Ela Nasua Dide, Ukanusa de Chabre. Rather, it could mean Nasua Dide, which means if it was Nasua, the Brisa means is if I marry this woman from scratch, I made Kedusha, I made Nasuan. Kanusa de Chabre means she's a Kanusa because she was my brother's wife. But even though it might have been done through Maimer, when we say Kanusa, we mean Kanusa because he's taking over a marriage that was his brother's marriage. Hakanami, Arusa Dide, Vishamer Shem the Chabre. So too, both tracks could be speaking with Maimer. The reason why the Bride uses the word Shemer Yavim, even though we're saying technically now Maimer was done, it's to tell us that this is taking over the marriage of his brother. Zok the Gemara. Rav Papa Amar, Hi Tanahu. It's going according to the following Tana. The Tanya, Ein mekanin la rusa la shkoisha kishiya rusa. As a matter of fact, you could never be mekana a woman who's in a rusa to be mashker when she's in a rusa. Avo mekanin oisa la shkoisha kishiya nasuda. He holds that you're allowed to be mekana a woman when she's in a rusa with the intent of when she'll become an asua to be mashker. So what does Rashi say? Rashi explains this very beautifully. Zok the Gemara, Rav Papa Amar, la'olam la'sedik we know the yesh chuppa. Don't bring a raya from this brisa that she swears that I was not chayta on you while I was in the rusa. Don't bring a raya from there the yesh chuppa. Because what was the raya the yesh chuppa? Because we said that you could never be makana, you cannot give a woman to drink unless she's in the suah. So it must be that she's in the suah. So it must be that there was a chuppah already, but the chuppah must have been after she was soiser, and therefore it's chuppah of suahs. No, that's not the case. Rather, Bahacha going to kinula kishir rusa. He made kinu when she was a rusa, vinasa, and he made the suan, ubala, and he was ba upon her, and then bahadar is tatra. The stira occurred not while she was in the rusa. The stira occurred when she became an asua. So he was allowed to make the Nesua. Why was he allowed to make the Nesua? Because she was not Soiser yet, but the Kinu was there. So a Papa hold that he was Mekana when she was Narusa, but she wasn't Soiser. Then he was allowed to marry her. So therefore, the Chuppah is not a Chuppah of Psuais. And if she was Soiser after the Nesuin, only at that point will he be Mashka her, and therefore you don't have any riot. He is Chuppah of Psuais because the stira didn't occur until after the Nesuin. So let me see the Gemara inside. So in fact, maybe the kinu is done on Rav Nachman Yitzchak Amar, which is the pshat that we're most familiar with, is there when she's swearing that I wasn't mizana when I was on the rusa. We're not speaking about the stira when she was in the rusa. We're talking about a woman who was a regular in the suah, and after she was a regular in the suah, then there was kinu, and then there was stira. But once we're making her swear about this current incident that occurred, now you make her swear about everything that ever happened, even though there was no kino over there. And it's Ali de Gilgo, which means she was only Niskana and Nistera after she was Masua. Now that we're making her swear, we'll say, now you're going to swear that even when you were only in a Rusa, you were not Chayte. Even though that has nothing to do with the kinoi, but Ali de Gilgo, you could make her swear about everything. Okay, let's stop here and we'll be mamshel later. So this is basically the sugya of yesh chuppah l'psulos. Will the chuppah passel her?